Okay, we're gonna knock this out of the park real quick. Uh, been meaning to do something like this for quite some time. Only do I recently get the chance. So we have punk philosophers. This is really just philosophers. However, someone made this list here that says that ranks everyone based on how punk they are, which I guess to me is like equivalent to um. I guess it's not the same thing as an A to F ranking. However, this list is great because it has everyone's names, and honest to God, I can't remember everyone's portrait. So having the names written down is like a massive asset. Um, let's start off. Uh, we'll just do alphabetical to make it snappier. Aquinas. Well, I was thinking about this before I did the podcast. All right. I will say that Aquinas is an S tier he's the highest tier in the traditional grading system, because was the preeminent philosopher of the entire Middle Ages and theologian. And that's, said to be a 1,000-year period, a millennium from 500 to 1500 effectively. You can move it maybe even 600 to 1600, or maybe 400 to 1400, depending on how you orient it. 500 to 1500 is more middle of the road. Um, I would probably say, honestly, I'd probably say 600 to 1600 in my personal view, because I don't think that the early modern period really sets in until the 30 Years' War. Um, and I can't explain all of it, all the minutia in my argument right now. So I'll just move on and talk about Aquinas. I went to his cell. He had in where was it? Naples. He I didn't realize it, but he spent a good amount. I think he went to school in Naples at the Federico too for one of his diplomas, because he was a master theologian, his PhD level training and all that, postdoc, whatever. I almost went to his cell, and for whatever reason, my Apple Pay wasn't working. So when I tapped my phone, the Google Pixel is Google Pay. It wouldn't let me get like the $10 entry ticket. So I was inside this massive church, and at the end of the church, there was like a room where there's an entryway that's cordoned off to Thomas Aquinas' cell, and Thomas Aquinas is like where he worked or something. I didn't even really. It was I was a busy day. I didn't really get to like read up on it too much, but he had like a scribe room, or where he lived in that around that church. So I was very close to the world that he inhabited, at least for some portion of his life. I but as far as, so he's an S. He's the top of the top. He's one of the best philosophers in human existence, history, in philosophy. West or east or middle. In terms of him being punk or not punk, I would say he's basically a cop. I mean, he's probably the most conservative philosopher you could find, and yet he's in that category. I would say he's probably the preeminent conservative philosopher in like in the totality of human existence. But if you're liberal leaning, you're not really going to be enthused by Aquinas. And frankly, I'm not. I'm fairly moderate about those things, but I find Aquinas to be, a little too textbook in the way he approaches his logical explanations. Is very like kind of circuitous and uh, dense. Now, it's necessary that he writes that way because he has to cover all his tracks. However, I just feel like it's something that you kind of it's scholastic, sure. It's very finely composed. But it reminds me of like some sort of Bach fugue. Like it's fugal, right? It just themes up going in curly cues until somehow they change into some other theme. That's the way he writes. The themes just coil and coil until they're no longer distinguishable. They're no longer, I mean, really distinguishable from a distance. But up close, they are different. They're minutely different. Anyway, so Aquinas is like basically a cop. I mean, he basically writes up a fucking prison's worth of logical sort of rigid rule based codes for how we live and perceive, and some of it is very elegant and some of it's a little more condemnatory and some of it's a little more um neither nor. It's sort of structural into the theology of you know the Trinity and the relationship between the human Christ and the divine Christ and the Holy Spirit, and then their interactions with sense and how sense applies to the way that they can perceive at a higher level than us mortal humans can perceive, and yet the Trinity imbues us with that same source. So it's all very like grandiose because he's tying in divinity to humanity in ways that aren't really that different from like verbal jujitsu sometimes. But as far as I can tell, I don't find it very fraught. I mean, it seems to work. I mean, I am a Catholic in a manner of speaking, so I am going to apologize for Thomas Aquinas, even though I don't necessarily consider him the most appealing theologian. I think as a philosopher in a list of philosophers, he has to be considered among the thin layer that is the creme de la creme. So yeah, Aquinas is a cop, but he would be on the opposite side of this list if we were ranking him just on the quality of his contributions to the philosophical canon and literature. Okay, next up is Hannah Arendt. Okay, this one I actually go to the same school she taught at, Brooklyn College. Brooklyn College, Park CUNY. She taught there for some time. I would say she is some either not very punk or punk, or not. She's middle. The thing with her was that she was sort of an apologist for Heidegger, who was a confirmed Nazi. So that's sort of I don't know. That's sort of. I mean, if punks are conservative, then it's definitely punk. I mean, it's definitely aggro. But at the same time, she in her own right, she was a gifted philosopher. So my ranking for her as a philosopher in her own right is probably like a B. I mean, she came up with this notion of the banality of evil, and unlike Aquinas, who most of the time just justifies common sense and does what we now call common sense, and does a very good job at it. Uh, Hannah Arendt she's more involved in the process that was in recent history where we became desensitized to violence against, violations of human rights and in violent forms. And Arendt kind of represents this reevaluation that either she had alone but influenced others, or we all kind of realized that like the Holocaust was evil not because it was this angry, jarring sort of chaotic murder spree, which it was, I guess, in the wartime, the war, the war, theaters of war. But when it was in the concentration camps, it was very banal the way it was typically executed. It was procedural, bureaucratic, mechanized. The killings in the concentration camps were the murder element was like reduced to a scientific sort of drudgery and tediousness. It wasn't really seen as murder, right? And that's why. And she says and her insight was that because I think we can agree on that part at least. But her insight was that that was the most evil thing about it, was that it was so mundane and banal, the way that millions of people were systematically executed. It wasn't even done in a dramatic, emotionally charged fashion, at least not all the time. So this idea that the Holocaust was sort of banal is almost like it's double edged, because on the one hand it condemns it as being not only evil but boring, and precisely boring because it is evil. But she's not only doing that, but she's also sort of making it sound less fiercely destructive than perhaps we really should consider it. And so she's giving it this very kind of intense reevaluation that makes her a really compelling personality. And this is also ties into her whole apologetics for Heidegger, which I think are justified, because Heidegger was the best he was the best phenomenologist in his era, which wasn't a super long era, but he was in a sense the world's best phenomenologist. I think you get other people who can do it, who end up doing it better later on, and then before, of course, you have Husserl and some others. Um, Saussure, he was, Auguste Comte, I believe. These guys working in linguistics, kind of, and then later on you get semiotics too. So after Heidegger, but Heidegger is sort of like a linchpin, or he's the midpoint for me conceptually in a lot of ways. Um, and then way before all that, you get the Hegelians, left to right. So Heidegger was someone that did need to be defended, and I think she did this incredible service and it makes me proud to actually go to the same college as her. But I do think that she does touch on controversial topics, but her bravery and being willing to do that is very cool. So I would say she's punk, just because she is squarely willing to go against the grain. And I would be go I would go so far as to call her very punk, except for the fact that she often sort of defends conservatism in its most heinous expressions, not just like middle of the road conservatism, but just very heinous conservatism. She slightly defends it, or seems to have sympathy to it. So I think that's a little wild. But I don't I totally understand that she has a right to do that, and I think it was, in some ways, it was very necessary for her to write those documents when no one else would. It's brave, and it helps that she's a woman. I think if a man wrote that kind of things, I think he'd probably be ignored, if not pilloried. Anyway, so I put her squarely in punk, not too liberal, not too conservative, but goes against the grain and has very salient arguments. She's definitely, I think, like a B plus philosopher. Aristotle. Oh, okay. Well, this guy is obviously he is Aquinas was the Aristotle of the Middle Ages, in at least in writing in Latin. Um, but even in Arabic, I mean, Aquinas is still very good compared to the Arabian writers. So I'm trying to think if there's anyone like Avicenna. I don't know. I think the main analog to Aristotle is Aquinas, who we just mentioned. Now, Aristotle is, on initially, I'd say not very punk. Thinking about it a little bit more, he ran a school. He's kind of strict. Most of his writings consist of that survived consist of what we call lecture notes from ancient Greece, from the Lyceum, which was his school, which I've been to his school, been outside it at least. There's a lot of museums in Athens. I didn't want to pay money for the Lyceum. Europe's busy. You go to Europe, you think you go one town for like a week. You end up just being busy, like looking at stuff. It's sort of goofy. Tourism, right? So not very punk. I would say schoolmaster goes to not punk. And then anti-punk, based on his actual opinions, well, he didn't really have a ton of like strong opinions. So I wouldn't say he's anti-punk. I would say he's just not punk because he never really he was very methodical the way he wrote. He was a proto-scholastic. He basically founded scholasticism inadvertently. Um, he was kind of more of like he was more of just like an encyclopedist in a sense, but he was an encyclopedist for analytical processes rather than for like factoids and figures themselves. And the other thing to remember about him is that his many of the people in the schools that he worked in the Lyceum or in Plato's Academy would have been more involved in like fact memorization and sort of less than theoretical like information gathering. Aristotle doesn't seem to be super interested in that. All the surviving works have not indicated that he was a fact obsessed type of guy. In fact, from what we can tell, he seems to be rather um, uh, what's the word negligent when it comes to necessary facts. I think the most striking example is when he believed that women had less teeth than men. He seems to have believed that in some of his writings. Can't remember which ones in particular, but he believes weird things that basic observation would like contradict, and he never can find like the opportunity to contradict himself, which is a very pompous personality trait, if we can impute that to him. So he's a schoolmaster, he's rigorous, but he has so little observable personality that I couldn't even really call him anti-punk. But I will definitely say he's not punk. Bordering on anti-punk, because he very well could have been anti-punk, and we just don't have any strict evidence proving it. Okay, Bentham. Okay, well, this guy was starting out in the middle. Oh, by the way, Aristotle, of course, is S tier. He and Aquinas. I mean, he's better than Aquinas in a sense, but also kind of less than in another sense, because Aquinas was more of a systemizer than Aristotle ultimately. Aristotle was inadvertently a systemizer because he wrote so many compendious books on thought worthy topics, but they didn't really interlock. Whereas Aquinas's Summa Theologia, it really interlocks better, or at least attempts to. And if you really examine it with a fine-tooth comb or magnifying glass, your mileage might vary. But I do think that he at least styled it as a comprehensive system, where only in retrospective do we view Aristotle as someone who had a very, very comprehensive system. And even now, it still looks a little all over the place with that retrospective touch added. Um, Bentham, yeah, Bentham was a screwball. I mean, Bentham, he believed in the panopticon. He believed in spying on everyone with a house of mirrors, like literally a house of mirrors that were at such different angles that you could see any room from one room, depending on the angling of mirrors. And that's, I mean, it's very like trippy thought experiment. If you actually try to think about it, it's really kind of wild, kind of fun, and I would like to see it done personally. Um, that seems like some kind of surveillance state BS. So that's going to put him not punk because he's, like I said, a control freak. He also believed that you can sort of use economics and ethics to calculate someone's the happiness of society and sort of engineer society to provide that. He had this charming term called the philosophic calculus. And Jeremy Bentham is a very he founded a really prestigious college in London. I think it was the London School of Economics, maybe, or University College London, one of those. Anyway, UCL, I think it was. And anyway, he was almost like this weird like caricature. It seemed like he was an eccentric. Like he was almost more like a poet in some ways, like a laureate of England than he was like a philosopher. I don't know if his philosophy has that much lasting influence. I'll look up real quick. I'll look up real quick just to see if there's anything that I'm missing on Jeremy Bentham. Yes, pre-Romantic era, mid 1700s to early mid 1800s lifespan. Basically, spent his whole time in England. Oh, he was a very important jurist. That's rather irrelevant to what we're talking about. Um, but he did sort of found a school of yeah, that's right. It was he founded utilitarianism, which is different than like deontological ethics. So his version of ethics is really kind of mechanical. I was going to say Machiavellian, but it's not Machiavellian in any real sense. It has that same dictum that the end justifies the means. That is very much true in a different way with utilitarianism. It's he's starting to view social science in a more reductionistic, detached lens, just like Machiavelli did in 1515. Bentham is doing this in the year 1800. So it's or 1815, as it were. So he's he's a little bit evil, and I think that's why he's so eccentric. There's a lot of trivia about him. He's basically the Benjamin Franklin of England. He's really, really eccentric and believes in really odd ideas. And I think he invented a few objects that are sort of, and he coined certain phrases. Like he's been influential in the broader culture. However, as a philosopher, he's kind of problematic. Like he just sort of is. He doesn't really respect certain. He kind of views people like numbers. He kind of represents the worst aspects of utilitarianism, despite being its official founder, I believe. So influential as a founder of a very famous and world consequential school of philosophy school of ethics. As a moral philosopher in his own right, though, I don't know if he's really an exemplar. Um, I would say he's not a cop because he's so crazy, but he seems to me anti-punk for sure. Okay, Isaiah Berlin. This guy's interesting. He's not really as he's not like Jeremy Bentham on like a grade scale would be not an A, or he'd probably be like a C philosopher in my book. But Isaiah Berlin may as well be a D. He's just not extremely influential, and his one idea that he has doesn't seem that original um, or amazing. However, he does seem kind of punk. I'll give him that. He has this idea that there's negative freedom, which is that freedom is sometimes freedom hurts other people's rights. And that's something that I think a lot of people overlook in 2023 is that, even one person exercising their freedom can actually be a bad thing for other people, and it can in fact diminish their freedom. And not only that, that's also true, and I'm sure Berlin would agree with this. It's also true individually in your own self. Like you can be very, very liberated in terms of how you are as an artist, a visual artist, as a craftsperson. However, that could impede your ability to, say, develop an intellect because you would spend all your time drawing and never read anything, or never, and so your intellect would be disproportionate to your artistic abilities. So the developments in that are wild and um, healthy in one vein maybe may be sort of drowning out the growth in other arenas in society or in one's own life privately. So I would say that's pretty punk to even broach as a topic. It's not very punk, but it's squarely punk, much like Hannah Arendt. I think Hannah Arendt was probably a better philosopher in terms of what she's most known for. Uh, However, I think Berlin, Isaiah Berlin, is very, like, average in terms of his accomplishment, but I think his accomplishment is cool. So he's like a band that you listen to that isn't great, but their style is really good, and so they have like two good songs, and then like everything else, the whole rest of the catalog isn't worth a lick, So yeah, I mean, a cool philosopher, not really the most productive in terms of, or the not he doesn't really reach the heights of, let's say, of some of the other guys. Up next, Buddha. Okay, well, Buddha is S tier. He would be the top of the top. His idea that desire creates suffering, and so if you mitigate suffering, then you can mitigate if you mitigate desire, then you can mitigate suffering, is a very effective sort of self-help mechanism. It's almost it's a psychological panacea. You can solve almost any problem with that method. I don't think it should be used with careless abandon and in all instances. However, I do think that, sukha leads to dukkha, is bad for prana or whatever. It's and bad for karma. I agree with all that. I just don't think I think it's a little heavy handed. So is it punk? I think it's not. Is it punk? No, it's not punk because punks care a lot about what they care about. They're not trying to reduce desires. I mean, maybe like, in like in this cosmic sense of where they've sort of lost their, you know lust for life, and they've turned into punks. They sort of fallen into a certain direction in life, and that has reduced, in a meta sense, they've lost their desires. So, but like that's probably, in most cases less than intentional. So the Buddha is not very punk. I think he's kind of in the middle because on the one hand, he's really into like selfish sort of self abnegation. Don't care too. You shouldn't care too much what the world's up to. You shouldn't try to be too worldly, too materialistic. That's very punk, I guess, or can be. But on the other hand, he also doesn't want you to have that much fun because he can see the heartbreak in that as well. And I don't think punks would advocate not having fun. I mean, there's a lack of hedonism in the Buddha that makes him just superficially not seem punk. So yeah, I'd say he's got kind of the worst of both in terms of he lacks the materialistic culture of the non-punks, and then he lacks the fun-loving free spiritedness of the punks. So he's sort of in the middle somehow. Okay, next up, Edmund Burke. Okay, well, this guy he invented classical conservatism. He's a very old-fashioned conservative. He was actually, I think, in his era, he probably wasn't even considered like conservative in the sense that we think of now. I think he was considered more like a libertarian. Um, No. Sorry, I have to jog my memory. I remember some as sometimes I remember some of these guys. You remember the biographical details more than their actual published ideas. Burke was very anti-revolution. He's kind of most known for being against the French Revolution and being more supportive of the American Revolution and acknowledging that there was crucial differences between America and France during this time. America, in his view, was was disconnected from the crown by land and sea. It had a tradition of it belonged to a tradition of overthrow, like or of sedition, because England had already been through a civil war in the previous century, and he thought the American Revolution was more. It was probably he also probably believed it was just a more educated movement. It was drawing on Republican ideals that were state building. There was a element of statecraft that was very like intended by the founding fathers, and Burke was sensing that. But he looked at France, and also England has this convoluted history where they had a top down system that was independent of the monarchy anyway, because for since 1215, right, since the signing of Magna Carta, the lords have been no they've been aristocratically in name, but they've also plutocratically run many regions of the country. And so there's a financial element to England that's a lot different than in France, where France, many of the farms were owned by aristocrats, and they were ran sort of like slave plantations where the farmers just were worked. They like worked all the time, worked kind of hard in the sun. But in France, the land's nice, so you can kind of get away with it. It's a pleasant landscape to work in. In England, the land's not as pleasant, so there was a little more diversity in how people made their money in England. And one of those ways uh, was buying property and renting property out, or I guess leasing property and subleasing it, because ultimately everything goes back to the lord of the land. Um, so his whole thing was that England was a little more there's a little more money lending and banking, and there's a little more financial in orientation than France was. And because of this, I don't know if he said, actually, to be fair, I don't know if this was his point, but this is a point about this is a point about England versus France and how their economies were different that impacted the reasons why their political cultures ended up being so different. It might be, from what I can tell, it could be is independent of Burke's writings. But Burke would have seen this on some level or another and agreed. I'm pretty sure. And France, the thing with France is that they were just so much more classical in orientation. They really kind of believed in the empire that they had built for themselves. So the fact that rebel rousers were trying to destroy the French Empire, I mean the ancient regime, right? We're trying to destroy the Louis, the 16th or whatever. Trying to undermine him was far more controversial and I guess degenerate in a way. However, there were so many poor people that it kind of like ended up just being kind of, and it were so many poor people in France in the mid 1700s and late 1700s, and at the same time, you go to other parts of the world and the poor people aren't treated as nastily as they were in France. So it was the wrong time to keep. It was an outdated um, social justice model that the government was using, and they were when it exploited its citizens, and it did so in a way that was effectively colonial. I mean, it was colonizing its own citizens, and so France, it had a revolution, but it never sustained it because its revolution was based on desperation. whereas the American Revolution was based on had kind of an idealistic yet rigorous political framework that was intended to be used in statecraft um, as much as anything. The French Revolution was far more uh, flash in the pan. So, with that said, uh, where Burke's I'm gonna look up Burke real quick, see if there's anything I'm missing that really needs to be mentioned. I forgot that he was Irish. It's kind of interesting. It kind of makes a little gives you perspective. This guy, conservatives in America really like Edmund Burke, and it's fair because he yeah, I mean he doesn't really have that many like ideas. He's not really like this. He's if you go down this note, I guess he wrote about aesthetics. Maybe he wrote about the sublime. That was his main thing. Um, what can we find about David Hume? Oh, that's right. I remember this. It's been a while, but he wrote about he wrote a whole treatise on the difference between the sublime and the beautiful. This is a little like artsy fartsy, but it was actually a very like on point and compelling essay, if not extremely rigorous in its prose. But yeah, funny, Wikipedia is saying that he was asked to expand upon it many years later, 30 years later, and he just said he didn't think he had the brain powers more effectively. So Edmund Burke was a funny guy because he was a little too high-minded for philosophy and so, to be a philosophical purist, and so he lended himself to other sort of peripheral careers. I don't know actually how he paid what he was. I think was he a member of parliament? Or like was he like a? I think he was more of a political sort of consultant. Yeah, he's a member of parliament, so he had a very kind of a statesman. So yeah, and of course he, as a statesman, he appreciated the American Revolution more because he thought it was designed by statesmen for statesmen, whereas the French Revolution had no real. It was sort of a low revolution, I think, in his perspective. I mean, it really was bottom up. Yeah. So anyway, or bottom to top down. It was down top. I don't know. Whatever it is. Burke. Um, how punk is he? Bottom up. He's not very punk. No, he's a cop for sure. Yeah, this guy is like the police commissioner. Okay. I mean, he doesn't like the French Revolution because it was conducted by poor people. He likes the American Revolutions because it's conducted by aristocrats who don't change much of anything. So yeah, I mean that sounds like a guy who, and he's Irish, of course. So it sounds like the police state fanatic, in my opinion. Butler, man, I don't know which. I have to look this. I know Judith Butler. Um, is this guy? This guy looks like a theologian, judging by his portrait. Joseph Butler, dude. I don't even think I read up on this guy. I don't think I've even read up on this guy. Okay. This guy is kind of like a really late Christian, pseudo philosopher. Who doesn't think that society should be hedonic. He's a moralizer. So he doesn't have an ethics. He has a moral philosophy. So the difference between an ethics and a moral philosophy is again bottom up and top down. Ethics is like what the state should enforce with its economic policies, its foreign policy, domestic policies of all sorts, legislation, right? Moral philosophy is about how people should view themselves and others, and how they should approach their own conduct in society, publicly or privately. Um, which is a far more religious and theologically laden framework. However, this system that he has is effectively a Christian. It's effectively a self help because it's so Christian, and Christian is kind of a self help literature. So I would say that in terms of this guy being a good philosopher or not, he's probably a low B because he's writing about things that are very much relevant to people. However, it's not higher than that because I think it's a little bit. Some of it just goes without saying. And in terms of him being uh punk or not, he's like the Buddha. He's not very punk, but he's not extremely unpunk either because he is trying to tell people how to like they should conduct themselves. He's just kind of hippie-ish, But at the same time, he's like he doesn't really go. He doesn't really want people to be selfish. So it's like, okay, do the one thing. He has kind of a moderate approach. So to me, that seems um lame. So that I wouldn't call it punk, but at the same and not fun, kind of like Buddha. But at the same time, he doesn't want people to. He wants people to sort of like comport themselves in a fashion that is like conducive to their own success. So and he views he ironically he views selflessness as almost like a surfeit version of selfishness that's superior to it, despite being a cheaper version of selfishness. And the logical jujitsu there is kind of cool. So I like this guy a little bit, but I also think he's kind of between worlds, between square and punk. Even though you'd think he's extremely square because he's a Christian, but keep in mind back then a lot of people were just kind of like that. Um, was it 16 or 1700s? Sorry, I mean I would assume it's 17, but it could be 16 because of how old the portrait is. And a small chance it's 18, just with a really outdated, sort of cheap. Yeah, he was born in the late 1600s. So, yeah, I mean, any guy who's born in the late 1600s is going to be a religious fanatic by our standards. I mean, maybe some of them would be Enlightenment, you know, philosophers and atheists and whatnot, like Voltaire. But like, by and large, like they're going to be religious fanatics, no matter how you slice it. Catholic, Protestant, Calvinist, Lutheran, whatever it is, Anglican, Presbyterian, whatever. Which is weird because some of these names get conflated. Just so you know, like as a primer, Presbyterian and Calvinist are really kind of the same. Protestant is an umbrella term. Of course, you knew that. And then Lutheran, way different from Calvinist, which is also Presbyterian, Calvinist, and Presbyterian, somewhat interchangeable sometimes. Different national sort of takes, but somewhat interchangeable theologically. And then Zwingliism is like way different, or it's not way different, but it's markedly different from Calvinism. Although it is also from Switzerland, just like Calvinism. John Calvin, Heinrich Zwingli, I think it's actually Ulrich Zwingli and John Calvin from Switzerland. And Ulrich Zwingli actually died. He was a multi instrumentalist, like composer type of dude. He was a very eclectic kind of guy, and he ended up dying in like a really small scale fight, almost a battle, over theology. So yeah. So anyway, that's kind of what you need to know about those things in the 1600s and earlier, 1500s mostly. Um, I have to admit I like Joseph Butler, but I do think that he has no real uh lifestyle. He's not very punk. He's not really a cop either. Sort of a little too middle of the road, kind of eerie. It's like Joe Rogan, Joseph Rogan, Joseph Butler. Like, what do they really believe in? It's like excessively moderate, in my view. Albert Camus. Okay, this guy is associated with existentialist literature fiction. As I don't know if he's really, you could call him a philosopher, although he was dear friends with the main philosopher of the 20th century, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was, like more than a literary giant. He was actually an academically trained philosopher. But Camus, I don't know if not so much. Right, Camus was more of a literary giant with existentialist themes, and he was very punk. I would say, yeah, I would say very punk because he, I mean, compared to the other, everyone else on this list, not compared to a lot of people, but he was like, he was like this dashing motorcycle driving sort of. I mean, he wrote book Rebel Without a Cause figure. He wrote books that were about people sort of going crazy in the I know in the Stranger, the guy just sort of murders someone for no reason just because of angst, and then it's like Crime and Punishment, but even more deranged. And then in the Plague, I mean, I don't know this whole synopsis for the Plague, but I do know that it's about the Black Plague, and there is some sort of demented activity. I'm sorry. Some sort of demented uh, behavior and social interaction in the Plague. Let me check the synopsis real quick. Okay, okay, this guy was also interesting because he was Algerian, which you don't get a lot of Algerians, man. Um, you don't read a lot. I think this you don't read a lot of Algerians. Um, was he? But his parents were French. He wasn't like Arab parents or whatever, Maghrebi parents, right? So it's already a little bit confusing. Um, the Myth of Sisyphus, very punk. I haven't read The Fall or The Rebel. I honestly didn't even know these. Oh, this is an essay, I see. And this is a these are all pretty interesting. I didn't I there's a lot more to check out than I realized. I thought he was kind of like a one hit wonder. Um, I knew The Plague was a famous book, but I thought it was so overshadowed by the Stranger, which is like a to me is like a magnum opus. But yeah, this book is a very these books are very depressing, but they're like kind of fun depressing. Like they're emo, but it's fake emo, where like things just get worse and worse and worse, but it's like so absurd that you kind of laugh at it or kind of find it like riveting even. Because it's like in a meta sense, it's very comical. But when you're reading it, you're kind of feeling sympathetic. But then you like walk away from the book, and you're like, wow, this book's kind of like fucked up. So there's like an ironic self awareness about how fucked up the themes and portrayals are. And these books end up being sort of like not that spooky. However, as a philosopher, I wouldn't give him an A. I would have to give him like a D because he has no real perspective. He's sort of a pseudo philosopher, but I don't think he ever really tried too hard to be a philosopher. I just don't think he was adept at it. Like he didn't have a comprehensive system. He wasn't a systemizer. That to me is important when it comes to being a philosopher. There's a scientific element here, and if you're really good at categorizing phenomena or noumena or epiphenomena, then you're going to be a good philosopher, no matter how you tabulate it at the end of the day. But I don't see Sartre as a guy who was really sorry, not Sartre, Camus as a guy who was really doing that, despite some splendidly written novels. Um, but this is definitely reminding me that I should read more of his novels, because I read some The Stranger as a teenager, and I thought it was very good, very punchy and paced. Um, has snappy pacing, emotionally striking, when it needed to be, and it could linger when you'd want it to, just enough that you didn't feel like it was too immature. You didn't feel like you're reading like a comic book. So yeah, he's a little puerile as a writer, but it's not like disgustingly so. I mean, maybe the biggest literary snobs would find this guy completely revolting for how kind of adolescent he is. But I think that's what also makes him very punk. The only reason I wouldn't call him punk personified is that he does just seem like a square. Like he was a man of his time. He wears these woolen suits. You know, he habituated offices. I think he was like a ladies' man and all this. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know. But he was certainly not like, one for the streets. Only in the loose sort of Parisian sense, where like everyone hangs out at the same coffee shops. But like he doesn't seem like a derelict, so I couldn't call him punk personified. But everything else is there. He has the intentions. He has he has the style, the artistic style. I mean, but his own lifestyle was just not punk. Not punk enough, at least. I'm sure there's some surprises if you read his biographies, but you can tell like prima facie that he's not a punk personified. To quote this tier name here, Confucius. Okay, well, Confucius is definitely not punk. I mean, anti-punk. No, he's like a cop. Because Confucius, great philosopher. I mean, probably an A. I wouldn't call him an S because he doesn't. It's not super systematic, but he was an A because his values were very like family oriented and sort of anti rebellion, and he didn't really clamor for reform much. So that's all. It's kind of these sound like cases against him, but if you believe in conservatism, he was a very well spoken exponent of classical conservatism from the time, ancient, and he had a lasting influence for, what it's longer than Jesus, right? Thousands of years. I mean, he was around. He's a little bit older than Socrates, or sorry, a little bit. Um, his writings are a little bit older than Socrates' writings. He lived earlier on than Socrates, and he's, like I said, like, this is another example. Sometimes the best philosophers are not really the most entertaining human beings. This guy was basically a cop, but he was the only thing that wasn't, like law enforcement about him was that he didn't believe in like extreme government control. He wasn't like but he did believe in a lot of family values and middle road antics, not pushing too far, being sensible, always trusting your senses, trusting your senses with other people's senses. He was very like folksy. He was kind of trying to systemize a sort of a bureaucratic mentality without actually promulgating a bureaucracy as such in the local governments. Eventually, Mencius, I think, would sort of expand Confucius's bureaucratic mentality and make it into a more fully fledged, fully formed bureaucratic social and economic structure comprised of workers and a literary educational system and all this. But beyond that, this Confucius was a scholar, warrior, so he had some vicious element. He kind of viewed himself as a warrior, in a very in an exceptionally loose sense, but because a lot of the aristocrats back then kind of did view themselves as warriors. But as you can see from his portraits, and we don't necessarily know if this is an accurate portrait because those are exceedingly rare. Um, but you can see from this portrait that he's not really ever portrayed as a spry, young man, strapping young man trying to, out on a, seeking adventure. So as much as I like Confucius and recommend his readings to damn near anyone, because they're very pithy, very readable. Whereas Aquinas, and even Burke, Aquinas and Burke are less readable. And even in translation, he's very readable, which is, a lot of things get worse with translation. Confucius doesn't get that much worse. So Confucius is God to so many in a vague sort of non-literal sense to many people in China. Probably less now after communism, but still, many people. So being that influential puts you squarely in S tier, or even beyond S tier, effectively. I still think that he did. It goes to show that like people who are not punk tend to do very well at philosophy. This whole categorization of like punk philosophers is is asinine. Like, you really think that the best philosophers are going to be punk philosophers? It doesn't work that way. I'm trying to find an instance where the best philosopher is also a really high level punk philosopher. But usually, being a punk lends to disorganization, and disorganization lends to poor scholarship, poor philosophical efficiency. Uh, your ability to convey your ideas may even be hampered. So it's really like an upward battle. Literally, the myth, the rock of Sisyphus. Okay, Beauvoir. Okay, well, she is definitely way more punk than Confucius. She is a feminist, exceptionally bright. She was a polyandrous. Um, um, she consorted for many decades with Camus a little, but mostly Jean-Paul Sartre, who was her, love, seemed to be the love of her life. At least that's like sort of the reputation. But yeah, at the same time, she would, they would both kind of cheat on each other frequently or infrequently, depending on the moment in time, the stitch in time, right? But she was a gifted and she was very aware of the differences between men and women. She doesn't get enough credit. I think I think she's hyper associated with feminism that people forget that she was, in her own way, she wasn't a total revolutionary feminist, and especially by modern, intersectional standards, she probably would have disagreed with a lot of the identity politics. And she was relatively conservative, I think, by purely contemporary standards. And at the same time, she was very, very much an exponent of women's rights and women's choices. And I mean, rights is a strong word, maybe women's choice. I don't know, something a little more personable than rights. I don't know what a right even is. I know what writing is. I don't know what a right is. I mean, well, the law can only tell me so much, but about who I am. But anyway, yeah, she's kind of. I think she's sort of seen as a little, second wavy. Um, she's sort of seen as second wave, maybe even first wave, sort of in between. Um, Late first wave, early second wave. The book The Second Sex is a very good book. I mean, I recommend it to anyone. The only thing is that it just really isn't that up to the minute. I mean, if you're into feminism, it changes so much that if you do want to sit through the drudgery and reading all this kind of rancid feminist tirades and stuff, like you're going to be in better shape than if you're reading by reading that than reading Beauvoir, because Beauvoir is kind of it's moderately outdated, mildly to moderately outdated, depending on what you're reading. And she had very rigid ideas about um, sexuality, despite having some very, some other ideas that were very fluid. So she isn't like the epitome of liberalism by any means, especially up to the minute 2023 standards. Anyway, okay, well, this guy is probably the most punk we've seen so far. Marquis de Sade. The other thing is, Marquis de Sade is, I guess he is a philosopher in the sense that he would sometimes probably call himself that. But it's sort of the lack of conventionality is sort of throws me off. But I think that's what makes him so punk. I haven't like systematically read his like philosophical musings. I can imagine that they're not going to be very systematic, and they're not going to be touching upon you know scores of different categories and myriads of different subtleties within the categories that are carefully disentangled from one another. I don't think he's disentangling categories in his musings. I think is from what I can remember, his musings are just him sort of being squarely um, atheistic, and then just sort of and then assuming that to be inviolably true, and then running off from there, he just starts talking about all the crazy sexual things that he should be allowed to do because religion, in his mind, is told hokum, bunkum, whatever. So really, not really, his false premises disqualify him from being a high-rate philosopher because they're sort of facile. However, he is definitely punk. I'll get he definitely punk personified. Some he, can't deny him that he's the G.G. Allen of punk philosophers. Um, okay. What I should have compared each of these to an actual punk group, musician, band, whatever, hardcore, whatever the case may be. Like, I'll try to do that from here on out. We still have some more. We still have like 25 to go or whatever. So he's punk personified. He is a libertine, and I think that, if anything, is the punk rock of the Sex Pistols and movement. And then even within the Sex Pistols libertine movement, somehow Desai would be G.G. Allen in the Sex Pistols. So the whole thing gets multiplied by itself and explodes. Descartes. Descartes is well, this guy did hide in a giant oven in order to come up with his philosophy. So that's pretty punk. And then he's very individualist despite being a rationalist. So I would say that is punk because not a lot of people can do that. He's religious, but he's kind of like religious in sort of like a ecumenical pantheistic way. He's extremely interested in the mechanisms of thought and how they pertain to the mechanisms of machinery and nature. And so he really tries to wed natural philosophy with sort of psychology, whatever, religious psychology of the time, primitive psychology, so on. Uh, uh, his writings are really doctrinaire in their style, so that kind of knocks him back a little. Like you can tell he's kind of he's kind of a pompous sort of fellow. I still consider him punk just because he's just kind of a wacko who he traveled a lot. He wrote a lot of letters to people, and he didn't really like arrive at any permanent station in life. He died in like the cold from pneumonia, I'm pretty sure. So he was kind of like a loserish guy. So I guess like, and then his actual beliefs on metaphysics were and epistemology were not really like anything to contradict punk, and he wasn't super crazy about government, from what I can tell. So uh, he was more interested in science. So I think he also had a funny thing where Galileo, um, at the time in his lifetime, Galileo was sort of forced to recant his observations with a telescope, and Descartes uh, said some interesting sort of like like non-statements where he kind of demurred comment, and so he kind of showed that he didn't really want to denounce Galileo, but at the same time he didn't want to affirm it either. From what I remember, I mean, he kind of like slightly denounced Galileo, but he did it in like a very cryptic sort of, well, I'm a thinker too, so I'm kind of implicated in the same, direction. So he implicated. He was sort of. He could see that he was going to be implicated in whatever Galileo was forced to do, and so he kind of sided with neutrality as much as he could. And I think that back then, even back then, when scientists were being allowed to make statements more and more, um, it was still brave of him to sort of just be neutral, at least a little bit. But I don't think I think it wasn't very punk that he did that, but I think it could have been worse. He could have been very not punk. He could have totally sided with the church in a really like obsequious and gushing kind of way that was disingenuous. But he didn't do that. So I say squarely punk, or at least slightly punk. Diogenes. Okay, Diogenes is basically a homeless man. So very few things are more punk rock than homelessness. Um, Sadly, I mean, I kind of wish there were. There should be. I mean, maybe Desad is more punk than Diogenes, but Diogenes definitely his philosophy had more of an attitude to it. He was more lowbrow. I mean, obviously, we don't know much about him. It's like what almost 2,500 years ago, and everything we know is fragmentary, and it's all anecdotes from I mean, Alexander the Great supposedly had some interaction where he thought Diogenes was such a riot that he thought Diogenes was cooler than himself. He said, if I could not be Alexander, I should like to be Diogenes. And it's because Diogenes told him, hey, why are you standing there, Alexander? Get the fuck out of my sunlight. And obviously, if you say that to Alexander the Great, you're gonna be like, people are gonna kind of respect the fucking nutsack that you have saying that. So Diogenes is punk. If you were a band, I don't know, he'd be like the Butthole Surfers or something. He would just be something sort of funny and like maybe the Dead Kennedys. He would be like the Dead Kennedys. He wouldn't be Gigi Allen. He has enough self respect to not be Gigi Allen, but he would definitely be a purposeful, humorous punk band that is popular and moderately has a sort of moderately broad commercial fan base. Um, I mean, he's definitely better regarded as a philosopher's philosopher than Desad. Desad is, I think Desad is not considered a philosopher except by the Foucault, Foucaultians, the Michel Foucault lights. Those guys probably love Desad, without even imagining what kind of variety there is and the love they have for him, I'm sure that there is an unabashed love for Desaad amongst that crowd. Anyway, up next, Michel Foucault's kind of punk if he's on there. He should be. Yeah, he's up. He's up soon. Engels. Okay, Engels. It's funny that they mention Engels. I don't know, like vis-a-vis Marx, what's so different. He's kind of. I would say Marx is more punk because Marx was basically had no money, mooched off Engels for years and years and years. Marx impregnated his maid and had a son with her, and then sort of like tried to cover it up. I mean, Marx is like reprehensible, like no matter like every which way in the bend, but like despite his like labyrinthine, punk rock antics, Marx's philosophy was a little bit square, but his philosophy was square, but it was also it implied punk rock situations, rebellion, permanent phases of rebellion, working class upheaval, working class dissension, working class um, re-legitimization. So his obsession with the working class was isn't in of itself punk. I don't know if every working class person is a good example of a punk. However, this call for revolution is very punk. I mean, I guess it's leaning towards anarchy. Some people would say Marxism is anarchy. Um, so Engels and Marx, they kind of have to be punk, don't they? Um, but Engels was this kind of English leaning German guy who wrote very fine, um, you know, sort of tepid essays on all sorts of Marxian topics that he kind of, you know, had a little spin on. Let's say he wasn't very original compared in his relationship to Marx, or outside of his relationship. More importantly, I would say, as far as we know, as far as I know, maybe a biographer can point out how exciting Frederick Engels was, in the moments he spent away from Karl Marx. But as far as I can tell, he's pretty lame. So I'll give him he's about as punk as Descartes, you know, or Berlin or Arendt, because he believed in punk the punk movement, let's say, but he didn't listen to the music. That's kind of how I feel about this guy. Like he liked it in name, but then did he really, he was like a business owner. Like, so he was very bourgeois from what I can tell. It doesn't really add up. Like he would complain about smashing in his windows, and then have order the police to arrest you, and then not really bat an eye, and then go and write a screed about how industrialists are like ruining the country. Well, he literally is like he's like buying their fucking glasses and buying their fucking soaps and buying their lanterns and all this, and their bedrolls, whatever. Okay, up next, Epicurus. Epicurus is more punk. A lot of these Greeks are more punk than we give him credit for. Epicurus was an atheist. That's pretty punk. He was a hedonist, which is very punk. So, I would say he's punk personified. Even though, and it helps that we don't know that much about him. What I will say is that he was a little bit of he was like a rock star type of guy. He kind of wanted people to follow him around and sort of he wanted, okay, whatever. He wanted people to follow him around. Didn't want to show my emails to the crowd here, so I just I'll check them later. He didn't want to. Epicurus was like he was one for the crowd. He's the most likely candidate for like a punk musician that is kind of a stoner, like more than he is actually a punk god. Epicurus is like the Misfits. He wants pretty ladies. He wants to show himself up. He wants to kind of kind of have it all, while at the same time not really having any of it. He's kind of like the Misfits. He's like weakly punk, but he's still very much associated with punk. Despite he's like an entry level punk. This is the nice guy punk, the punk that doesn't spit in your face and call you a turd. He's the punk that wouldn't embarrass your parents when you bring him to Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. So, or embarrass you in front of your parents, I guess, whichever one ends up being more salient to the situation there. Okay, Fanon. Well, this guy's kind of like this guy's kind of boring. He's like Engels. He's like Black Engels. He's like a Marxist type of dude, very much passionate about post-colonial restructuring, or just like bringing an end to sort of the systemic problems of like late colonialism. However, I don't. He was kind of more like a whistleblower than to me, but like a whistleblower at like the global level, not for any particular group, but just for colonialism as a ideological and political structure, economic, right, all of it. So he's sort of a sociologist. Uh, I don't think that's very punk. But I think it's punk enough to be considered in this tier for sure. He really is a wannabe revolutionary. Although it's sort of like predictable, isn't it? At least I think so. Foucault. Okay, Foucault is getting. I would say Foucault is a little bit. I mean, is Foucault more punk than Epicurus? Is he more punk than Epicurus? I guess he kind of would. He seems to be. The thing with Epicurus is Epicurus seems like he kind of like had more friends or something. Like Foucault seems like a dweeb. I don't know. It doesn't seem that punk. I know his philosophy is is like trying to reorient decadent behavior as sort of like more neutral and more legitimate and justifiable than it's otherwise traditionally been perceived. I just think that Foucault is also kind of like is a wacko, which is kind of punk. But being a wacko by itself doesn't make you a punk. It's just kind of associated with it in many contexts. But by itself, it doesn't really mean anything. His obsession with sex is interesting, but his obsession with sex is kind of like it's like formalized. However, he cuts against he is anti-conventional, so he cuts against the grain. He kind of shirks convention, um, which is more punk than most. He's not like he isn't like some self-explanatory type like Aquinas or Confucius. He's not trying to systematize you know boredom or something. So given that, I think he's kind of more edgy. And he's definitely more edgy than Fanon, Engels, Descartes, Berlin, or Arendt. But is he more edgy than Beauvoir or Camus? Probably slightly. But the problem I have with Foucault is that he was sort of. It's like on some level you wouldn't even have to. Why you. If you really were punk, you wouldn't be writing about the origins of the psychoanalytic origins of demented sort of perversions
and sort of trying to explain. You'd be kind of like, I feel like you would be writing about, if you were to write about that kind of thing, you would write about how good, like deviant sexual behavior is and why it's good, rather than sort of explaining it. And maybe there's more to his writings than I'm like aware of, but I think he's mostly known for sort of explaining the origins of homosexuality, master slave, S&M sexuality, just sort of non-canonical sex. Let's put it, non-straight sex, gender roles in sex. He's known for sort of exploring those with his verbiage, but I just don't think he really is an exponent of it. I think it would be a lot more punk if he were. So I'm gonna knock him down a tier just on that basis. Now, I could really, maybe Epicurus and Foucault should trade positions. Epicurus is low on his tier, and then Foucault is definitely higher in the tier he's in now. So I'm going to do that. And Foucault is the Sex Pistols of punk, of philosophers. But maybe I already said that about de Sade. So maybe Foucault isn't that. Maybe Foucault is like the Clash. I don't know. I have a poor reception on Foucault. I think he's a little too meandering for what he was trying to say, and he probably could have been more efficient. And because of that lack of efficiency, I guess the Sex Pistols are kind of like that. They're kind of not most efficient lyricists. Thematically, they're sort of incoherent. So I guess he is the Sex Pistols, which means de Sade is back, unfortunately, without his Sex Pistol association, and must settle for Gigi Allen status. So, it's getting worse for de Sade. Even though de Sade is a forerunner, though. Foucault is after de Sade by centuries. But Gigi Allen was after the Sex Pistols by decades. So the whole thing is topsy-turvy for sure. Okay. Goldman. Oh, she was a socialist. She was an anarchist, right? Emma Goldman. Oh, this is pretty punk, actually. She's an anarchist. Kind of dig it. A rebel woman. Yeah, I mean, they're calling her a rebel woman. That's pretty punk. I don't know. I think, you could see she probably was kind of like, probably had some conservative tendencies at the end of the day, but I think, an anarchist, kind of out there. They plan to assassinate Henry Clay Frick. Her and her anarchist lover and lifelong friend, Alexander Berkman, plan to assassinate Henry Clay Frick as an act of propaganda of the deed. So she was pretty. So she was pretty. That's as punk as it gets, I think. I see why she's on this list, because in most lists of philosophers, she wouldn't even be on here. The fact that she's on here means that she clearly is a punk. And Fanon and Foucault are kind of like that too. Oh, Foucault's on a lot of lists. Camus, I think, is more like that. Just and Beauvoir. Where is she? Where did I put her? Here, Goldman, not punk. Nope, punk personified. Okay, up next, Hegel. I mean, maybe just very punk because she just sort of like she didn't really walk the walk, but she talked the talk. But still, planning to assassinate someone's pretty wild. Hegel, okay, Hegel's not punk. Handel's anti-punk. Well, Hegel's not anti-punk. I don't know. He is because he believes in Christianity so much. But he also believes that chaos, has a role in creating new kinds of evolutions of order. So he's kind of in the middle because he believes in order in a weird way, but he just as much as he believes in chaos. So he's squarely middled, um, just by himself. Heidegger, okay, well Heidegger has some dubious sort of political views, or he did. I mean, he was a confirmed Nazi, and he was an avowed Nazi, and he never recanted his Nazism or felt the need to make a public statement doing it. Um, but that's not really his philosophy. His philosophy is a little more esoteric and metaphysical, or starkly so. I would say Heidegger is he punk? Well, his whole thing is about you kind of turn into what you do. You kind of, I think he's punk if you look at his actual philosophy, because his philosophy is really weird and sort of illegible and sort of convoluted, and it's like it has a lot to do with turning into the thing that you didn't want to be, and then you become that thing, and then everything you do is informed by what you've turned into. And so when you turn into something, the next thing you turn into, you're sort of phenomenologically trapped in your prior states, and you have to reflect them with the next thing. You're always kind of, so his whole thing is like, it's like he's very interested. He's sort of saying that free will has its limitations because free will is a component of a predetermined structure that never really stops being part of the image that is ongoing. The ongoing representation, the ongoing evolution is still sort of indicated. There's a fossil record, let's say, of everything that you used to be, and everything that you turn into is also like can be predicted by what you used to be. And then when you are the thing that you involve yourself with, you become something. But becoming isn't the same thing as being that thing, because you can never be anything. You can only become things. So I would say the way it sounds is aesthetically very artistic and punk. But I also feel like the way his philosophy is largely a justification for Nazism, because he's saying that there is no true independence from what you're stuck as. If you're stuck as being Jewish, you're never going to leave being a Jew. You're never going to leave being black or white or whatever. So, but I think that there's something weird, like bizarrely punk about just kind of putting out some crazy philosophy like that. And to be fair, his philosophy is considered like 100% legitimate. More so, it's very very respected. It's just his whole angle seems like it obliquely justifies Nazist prejudice. So with that said, I can't move him up from not from pat to very punk, because the attitude is there for very punk, but he's just his politics knock him down to just a square. He's about as punk as Fanon. Fanon is the woke version of Heidegger. Heidegger is the alt-right version of Fanon. Let's say they are two peas in a pod. So ha ha ha. Thomas Hobbes. Okay, well this guy has a lot of punk energy. He's more of a metal. Honestly, Thomas Hobbes is more metal than he is punk. I would say he is basically a cop. I mean, he's a brutalist sort of authoritarian. He believes that the monarchy is a leviathan that's self-preserving and has an absolute dominance hierarchy that's top down in nature. its nature. So I would say he's anti-punk. I don't know if I'd call him a cop because he's a little too metal to be for me to call him a cop. I think he just likes brutality and he's just guising it in his sort of top-down manifesto. He's like a sadist or a structurally or a neat freak or control freak. I don't. But I think he's too much of a control freak even for the police. Like I don't think he likes the police that much. He probably likes the police in a way, like he likes their personalities, the role of being a cop. I don't think he wants them bossing him around. I don't think he sort of likes that. So weirdly contradictory. I would put him at a cop, but he's just too stylized and individualistic. He's not so obsessed with controlling people and minimalizing individuality, but which would make him a cop. But he's bordering it. And with this, and he kind of greets them with a smile every time that he walks their way. So dubious for sure. But Thomas Hobbes is a pretty good philosopher. He's pretty systematic, which kind of underscores that even someone who's markedly evil can write pretty good philosophical, tractatus or treatises or tractata and treatises or whatever. Tractatus. I don't know. I think tractatus is a little like sort of rarefied mumbo jumbo. His treatise was pretty good. It's pretty good reading. He compares the political body to the human body. He talks about how the lungs and the liver and the skin and the brain and the heart and the spleen and how they all like pertain to different branches of government, like judicial and executive, and it's kind of trippy because it's very 1600s 1500s, very early modern. You don't really know, like, the aesthetic is more interesting than the actual politics because it's just so out of time, or it's stuck in such a bygone era. Okay, basically, the thing to know about guys from the 1600s like Locke and Hobbes is that they view their philosophizing about they're philosophizing about government roles in shaping the new world, because the English colonial network is so impressive, and it gets more impressive, that they're really, the stakes are rather high, probably too high for like the individuals in modern life to really concern themselves with. So there's something very like magnificent about Hobbes and Locke. It's sort of, and it's the magnificent the way Shakespeare is magnificent. Yes, they're tackling themes that are like so universal and sweeping that they almost don't even apply to any one person, because they lose their individual touch. Um, Hume, or this is another guy who's kind of like that. But he was in the Augustan age. He was a little. Hume is okay. He was like an atheist. He's kind of punk. He's kind of, yeah. I mean, he believed in perceptions, very sensual. People who like senses probably like him. He's an empiricist. I think his politics were probably busted. Like, I mean, I'm sure he was like rather conservative, and he probably believed in slavery. Let's see. I mean, he died in 1776. He died before the American Revolution even really took off. He attended the University of Edinburgh at 12 or 10. But then again, 14 was the typical age. That's kind of crazy. You go to university at 10, 12. You didn't even graduate. Well, yeah, if you're going to college at 10, I can't imagine you graduate. No, just kidding. Voet and Vinius. Cicero and Virgil. Well, this is all pretty, like, par for the course. They talk about these guys like their childhood and stuff, like they're doing these like things that were noteworthy. But literally every fucking kid who was literate would have to read Cicero or Virgil unless they literally were just an apprentice at a fucking accountant firm or something. Like literally, or like a shoe bender. And the kind of people that like were like literate that weren't reading Cicero and Virgil were literally just stuck in doing some lame job their entire life that required basic literacy. But that was like a I don't know like how many what percentage of like the sort of like the lower middle class that would have been. But like most people that were getting any sort of education, and I guess educations were precious. Still, anyone who's getting an education would be reading Cicero or Virgil. God forbid they weren't. You don't. I mean, you're not reading Virgil, and you're studying Latin like every other schoolboy. It's like Virgil and Cicero. You're not reading. That's kind of like being a Christian and not reading the Bible. Hate to say it. It's like, but I guess the idea in this quote is that he was interested in these Dutch authors too. Oh, because these were Dutch jurists, and I guess the Dutch jurists were really admired. I've noticed that like sometimes Dutch authors and Spanish authors in this period are like Leibniz really liked Spanish Catholic theologians. Some of these authors, like you'd be surprised, like in the 1600s, like what was stylish or what was necessary for education back then, what was in vogue. Um, he wrote it at 23, dude. Imagine that you write an inquiry concerning human understanding at 23. You're basically just coasting the rest of your life, right? So what did he do afterwards? After he was 23, essays, moral, political, literary. Yeah, he kind of just coasted on that, didn't he? He he wrote some histories, the history of England, which is not something that's necessary to read if you're interested in the history of England. So I would say this guy's he really coasted, and then he for a long time he didn't even gain a professorship at Glasgow. He sold his house to James Boswell, so he was getting he was just a man about town, kind of. He is associating with the Samuel Johnson, Samuel Richardson, James Boswell, um, the Poker Club of Edinburgh. Oh, he went to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and they fell out. He wrote an account of his dispute with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. That is interesting. I want to read that. Okay, well, I will say that he wrote his best work at 23, and everything else he wrote was kind of random and sort of unnecessary and just sort of grandstanding ish. Um, However, he had the sense to write an account of his historical falling out with one Jean-Jacques Rousseau, so that's pretty with it. As far as him being punk, I don't know. I mean, he definitely had the rock and roll career. He maxed out at 23, and then just sort of was carted around the rest of his life. I would say he's not very punk because he's like he is definitely like a stodgy and probably bloviates when you talk to him for more than 5 minutes. He probably just starts ranting about quirky this and that pseudo opinions. He doesn't seem like the best personality ever. He seems sort of formal, but at the same time, he cared about liberty somewhat. He cared about independent experience, independent of reason, somewhat. It's kind of it's kind of precious. So yeah, he was like a bureaucrat with with artistic leanings. It's not the worst thing you could be, but definitely sort of awkward. I'll put him squarely in the middle. Not very punk. Okay, we still have a lot to do. I don't know who this is. I can't Irigare. Okay, I'm gonna look this up on the Wikipedia. Irigare, a feminist. Well, is she a third wave? Okay, she's got some. She's got some really. She's still alive. 92. She's Belgium. Oh, okay. Well, she's pretty interesting. Okay, I can already tell that she's got some heady tomes out there in the deep web marketplaces for these kinds of things, the academic circles. Um, yeah, she seems pretty interesting, and I don't know. They call her a feminist. I mean, you write like one book on like about what it's like having a vagina, and then you're branded a feminist the rest of your life. But still, I don't probably I don't know if you disagree. Um, she seems like a pretty cool philosopher. Not gonna lie. Oh, she has some very odd like ideas about air and fluidity being like necessary, and like she doesn't like the mechanistic philosophizing style of this, oh yeah, I've actually heard about this woman. I didn't know her name, but I've heard about her because she's very um controversial and sort of eccentric, and she believes that phallocentrism is a problem in philosophy, which is like kind of true. I mean, she's not wrong with what she's saying. I just don't know how salient it is. Like, does it really? Are we really like gonna like well, Kant and Hegel are they're writing these big books because they're compensating for not having the biggest penis. Like, I mean, or whatever it is, or they're writing these large books because they want people to see them as having being big, just like their penis. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's all very psychoanalytic, but it's also like it seems like sort of the cheapest sort of like interpretation of psychoanalytic theory. Like, oh yeah, it's really like it's their problem is that they have a penis, and if they didn't have a penis, they really understand that there's a lot more going on. I mean, yeah, okay, well, I mean, even Freud would try to like, talk around that kind of like mumbo jumbo a little bit, but and try to get down to like actual like problems that people have in their lives, not just say that they're assholes for having genitals, but saying that maybe the genitals led to them having problems, and then talk about the problems, not talk about the genitals. But so this woman is sort of she sort of has sort of this proto transgender take on things where it's like maybe the penis is the problem. Um, so if you're one of those, if you're a transgender like young artist person, you might think that like this woman is like the epitome of punk rock personified, right? Because she is she just sort of embodies that whole like the whole differential there. However, I hesitate because I think that there's something very opportunistic about this woman. Like she's looking for some sort of like ideological like code that she can kind of just like chirp out to people, and they're just like, oh yeah, and they all just sort of hive mind with with her, and then just talk in circles for forever. So the lack of sensibility there is a little like scary. I would say she might even have a mental health issue. At least when she wrote some of these books about phallocentrism. And I mean, she says that like that like the vagina makes you think differently. And I don't know if that's I could see that being true, but I don't think that we should really. I don't know if we're mature enough as a society to just sort of embrace that yet, because it sounds a little hocus pocus. Like, oh, having a vagina makes you magically incapable of rational thought, and it makes your personality like mysterious and strange, and and men have never been able to figure out. So it goes into all these problematic directions that are like, I think might be the futures, but might be something that it's the onus of the future to work with. Um, I'll say she's punk. I'll say she's like Goldman. She believes in some sort of crackpot stuff, but it's not like it's definitely not you know not punk. So by process of elimination, I would say it's very punk. Up next is but it's like it's just sort of puerile. I guess that's what it takes sometimes. John Stuart Mill. Okay, well this guy is a utilitarian. He's basically a cop. Yeah, but I don't even. I mean, he does believe in like liberty, but he has like weird ideas about liberty. They're sort of like that's sort of like implied the necessity of a kind of like cooperative, like like a hierarchical system. Uh, I would say he's anti-punk because on some level he probably doesn't. He could probably see the value in punk. So like he's sophisticated enough that he'd see the value in it. He lived before it was a phenomenon worth considering, or worth was even an observable phenomenon. Let's say besides vagrancy, or some movement that I don't know from the 1800s. Kant. Okay, well Kant is. Um, this guy was like a loser. I mean, this guy was like, he had like one friend. He was always thinking about his book he was writing. He like never he walked in the same pattern every day, all day. Um, yeah, he was kind of like boredom McGee. Um, so he's not very punk. Was he not punk? Yeah, I would say he's not punk. I would say he was like Hegel or Aristotle. He never got laid, as far as we know. He was like an incel. Um, why he was like that, I'm not really sure. I just think he didn't like he was like a misanthrope. He didn't really like talking to people that much. Or if he did like doing it when it was like when he knew kind of how the conversation would go, which is not that often in life. So when besides those those few prescribed events that one falls into, he was fairly bureaucratic about everything and sort of not having a lot of fun. It's kind of sad to think about. But his actual philosophy was kind of, eh, no. I mean, his philosophy was uh was really dismissive of superstition. So I would say he's sort of I would say he's anti-punk. Okay, Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's a lot more punk. He was one of the first existentialists. He was kind of insane, but like in a fun way. Okay, how much battery do I have left? 24. I can just move the computer. Uh, he was punk for sure. I mean, he was actually. I mean, he was probably very punk because he was just sort of bipolar and sort of was lazy, and he would sort of write about taking leaps of faith all the time. Like he believed that you like in order to have faith, you had to be like valorous and just sort of burst out into the scene and like that's pretty showmanship. That's pretty showman like, right? So his values were really kind of manly, but he himself was like a coward. Was like sort of craven and lame, and he was like an incel, like a lot of these philosophers, and so but his version of incel was based on some weird kind of like extremism to his fidelity to Christianity. Um, but he was also like not afraid of a fight in a sense. He was very kind of riotous. So despite being, I think he's the only one who's I will put in very punk who was just clearly an incel. He's the only incel who's going to be rated that high because he just had a feisty emotionality to him. He was I guess Nietzsche would probably be the other one. The existentialists, besides a Camus, most of the existentialist philosophers are like reluctant incels. It seems like. Okay, Kurzweil. Oh, this guy. I know this guy. I can't remember how to like explain his whole like his big idea or whatever. I don't remember his big idea being that impressive. Edison's rightful heir. Dude, this guy okay. Okay, wow. Anyone the heir to Edison. I love it. This guy who never invented anything is considered the this what did this guy invent? He's considered the Edison's heir, and he never even invent anything. This shows you how powerful the media is. I mean, this is supposed to be like objective. It's Wikipedia, and they're calling him Edison's heir. And it's like I've never heard of this guy. Never heard of anything he ever created for anyone. His creative approach. What did he do? What did this guy do? This guy is the most trumped up, like pseudo intellectual techie that I've ever. He's like a fake uh, computer programmer. Oh, is he the guy who believes in like anti-aging? Maybe that's why they like him. No, I don't. 10 cups of green tea, 8 to 10 glasses of alkaline water. Alkaline water. If he invented alkaline water, okay, maybe Edison's heir. But I'm pretty sure he didn't fucking do that. So yeah, I don't know. He said this guy is such a every little statement he says on any topic is like recorded on his Wikipedia, and literally he's just some random public intellectual that has minimal originality and is not significant. What is he known for? At age 15, he wrote his first computer program. They're so like they're so like mid. Yeah, okay, they're like. I mean, he was he's kind of like he's kind of a layabout, dude. He's like networks with dweebs, if really like very effectively. He's probably a great hang if you're just at some party and you're like where you obviously not a very cool party, but one where it's like a bunch of software junkies, and this guy shows up and he just starts blabbing about Marvin Minsky days at MIT where he fucking invented a program that never made any money, but Marvin Minsky used it and then got a grant. And I mean, it all seems really boring. Martin Van Buren High School. Yeah, I think for me the most interesting thing about him is that he's from Queens because I live in New York, and I'm just like primed to like be interested in weird New Yorker things. I don't know. A lot of these guys from like New York, they don't really have like a singular accomplishment. I've noticed they're sort of just like they just sort of vaguely represent some kind of, ideology or, like hobby, or like that guy Mickey Okaku. Like what, I don't know. He's never like invented anything. He's just sort of like grandstands. Um. Okay. Well, so this guy sucks. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Where do I put Kurzweil? I don't even think this guy's a philosopher. Uh, I don't know. I wouldn't call him a punk. Oh, I guess people like whoever made this list. They probably like him because he's a futurist. And if you're a futurist, you're going to talk about things that are like, like tangentially punk rock because you're talking about transhumanism, and you're going to talk about, the ethics of, increasing liberties or decreasing them in certain situations and certain contexts. So he's got kind of a moodiness to him. He's like the Blade Runner, public intellectual. He's got that sort of moodiness to him. He's got this Philip K. Dick sort of like edge lord kind of, safe space, uh, you know, I don't know. I don't know where my train of thought is going. He's like this. He's sort of like he kind of appeals to all factions. He's sort of an edge lord, but he's also sort of this safe space promulgator. He's kind of like he kind of like wants to live in a glass bubble, but he also kind of like wants to talk about real issues. Uh, I don't know. I think he's. I don't. Yeah, I just think he's not punk. I don't know. He's kind of like he's kind of a bureaucrat, right? Um, and I mean, I don't know. He's probably got some interesting books if you want to read someone talk about other people's ideas and never have any ideas of his own. Okay, kind of like this podcast. All right, specifically this one, especially Lao Tzu. Okay, this guy's the most punk because this guy, as far as we know, he didn't even really write his own books. He kind of didn't really have like a this guy is really like he's like a sage. He doesn't really over explain. He doesn't under explain. He just says the one thing he needs to say and he leaves. So I guess he under explains, but he's kind of like who's that Daniel Johnston? He's like the Daniel Johnston of philosophers. He has like one point and that's that true love will find you in the end. Yes, it will. And that one point is the only point he ever needed to make. And then as long as he makes that, we're all good. So to me, that's kind of punk, but it's not punk personified because I would just say it's punk. I mean, he seems a little bit like just like sort of a recluse. I mean, I guess they call them hermits to be polite, but I'm pretty sure this guy was just like didn't really know how to talk to people, and so he'd just say like cool poetry, and like try to vibe off that, and then everyone would be like, "Whoa, man, this guy's kind of hip. He just talks in rhythmic poems, and he's this old man on the mountain with his walking stick, and he just lives off the fish that he finds in the river. Like he probably he's pretty maybe he has a wife or maybe not. Maybe he's an incel. Whoever. Lao Tzu is a kind of mysterious, but he's like mysterious in like in a dumb way. There's nothing really that impressive about Lao Tzu as a personality. And to be fair, no one really knows anything about him. He is effectively a mythology, or a mythic figure, if you will. Up next, Locke. Well, Locke believed in slavery, but he also believed in liberty, in like on paper. I would say he's anti-punk because he kind of like didn't practice what he preached that much, but he was sort of just like a rich dude. Like he worked for like some lord as a doctor, and he was just sort of hanging out at that guy's house all the time and like eating his food and whatnot. That's kind of like
That's what I've heard is that he lived in someone's like their estate on the grounds, and he never. Hold on a sec. I'm gonna pause this because my battery's low. Oh, it's not that low. I won't pause. John Locke was kind of like a factotum, you know. He's another one of those layabout guys. He just sort of like, uh, sorry, not factotum, a sinecure. Yeah, he was a cynosure or whatever. He was a guy who like was paid to kind of do nothing, and I guess every like rarely he would perform some doctoral duty. So Locke is kind of, you know, he's a philosopher because he just out of boredom. Uh, and not my favorite one. I think his strategy is pretty good. I think he kind of knows what to say to sound polite. But I think when it comes to like the nitty gritty of like deciding complex issues and resolutions and all that, I don't think he really has a strategy or a tactic. I think he just sort of he has these kind of like this very top down sort of uh, facade of what it means to be responsible, and then when it actually comes to execution, he probably flounders left and right, and he doesn't seem like a very capable. I think he did a capable person. I think he did very poorly in school, or he was kind of a mishmash in college, and then he sort of compensated by having this air of dignity and a sprightly decorum. What does sprightly mean? I don't know if I mean that. What does sprightly mean? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Sprite-like, vivid, vivacious, airy. I don't know. He's kind of, yeah. I don't know. He's he's like Isaac Newton, but like way less necessary. Although then again, Isaac Newton didn't wasn't the only guy who invented calculus. So even Isaac Newton, by some logic, is unnecessary. All these English guys who like grandstand as like scientists in the 1600s or like with the Royal Society, you know, they're just kind of like there's like probably like a guy in Germany doing the same thing. So like keep in mind, you know, the world doesn't revolve around England, you know, just so you know, just in case you forgot. John Locke is kind of a it's like he was like the first corporate philosopher, if there was one. And he maybe he was the last one too, because I don't know of that many corporate philosophers. But he was like the Ray Kurzweil of his day. He would just sort of mansplain to the point where to the point that you forgot how unoriginal he was. Okay, up next is Machiavelli. 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 Oh yeah, well this guy said the end justifies the means, and you just gotta do whatever it takes to win, and just be scientific about your approach and not work. This guy was red pill. This guy was the red pill of his day. But I don't know if that makes him punk. I think that makes him sort of like alt-right, possibly even an incel. So I would say he's punk, but he's not more than punk because, well, he's very punk. You know why he's very punk? Because he wrote his book, The Prince, his famous book, his most famous. All of his books are kind of famous, but his most famous book, The Prince, he wrote it as like with as like tongue in cheek. Like he didn't really believe in it that much. He was doing it as an example of like a devil's advocate kit. So that's like that facetiousness is very punk. And the other thing was that a lot of people forget that this guy kind of invented like social science because he was the first person to really treat um social phenomena as with an objective lens that was divorced from sort of religious moralizing. Now, he was the first person to do it with like with like who could do it who did like full blown
I mean, there are other people who like tried to do it and they just got like censored, but he did it like very full blown, and like you could see like the books were fully the printing press was like I think recently invented, so his books were just rapidly published all over the place, all over the map. And Peter, I was reading this book today about how Da Vinci was basically the natural scientist, physical scientist, and Machiavelli was the social scientist, and they were contemporaries. They were friends actually. At one instance or another, they worked on some sort of bridge relocation project or river relocation project. So I would say he's very punk, in the context that we're in. Marx. Yeah, I would say also Marx is very punk. Marx was like a Marx didn't really seem to give a fuck about anything. He borrowed money. He never made money, rarely at least. He would screw anything he could. He fuck anything that moved. He liked to drink, and then he had a huge ego and thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and he usually was, but not always. I think yeah, Marx is an animal, and his whole philosophy is basically birthed countless um, punk perspectives and offshoot concept bands and concept philosophy albums, and anarchy arguably wouldn't exist without Marx, even though it's not officially the same ideology. It just it's just so related at its fundamental rebelliousness that Nietzsche. Oh yeah, okay. So, but the thing is, Marx was like, yeah, he was kind of he had this sort of bureaucratic professorial air to him. Nietzsche Nietzsche is way more punk. Nietzsche was like now, to be fair, a lot of people think Nietzsche like invented Nazism, but that's more like Nazism was sort of invented by like a group of people, and a lot of those people liked Nietzsche, but they kind of like interpreted it as like an impetus to just start their own band. But Nietzsche was totally deranged and animalistic and fearsome, and yet he was sort of contained in this civilized context of being like a supposed having this air of a gentleman at times. So in a way, he had what we have, where we're living in this modern society, and yet we're sort of actively rejecting it at every turn. So he is punk personified, and I'm actually going to move Foucault down because you can't really Nietzsche is so much more punk than Foucault that it just doesn't make sense to have Foucault up there. A lot of these guys who are not in the god tier of punk are sort of like maniacs. They're like that have like this element of self-preservation going on where they don't really embrace the crazy, and they're always sort of holding back a little, and they end up with these bureaucratic professorial jobs, or they end up writing for some publication, but it's like consistent pay, or they end up just living on like they're not really like on the bleeding edge as much as you might think, at least not entirely. So yeah, I would say most of the people who are philosophers, like the biggest categories are is the second to most extreme, which I find kind of surprising in my assessment here. All right, let me check the battery. All right, I'm gonna go move into the living room and finish this. Nozick. Oh, dude, this guy Nozick. I remember this guy. He's so boring. Robert Nozick. Okay. This guy's kind of punk, yeah, because he goes against the John Rawls thing, which I think is bullshit. I mean, I think John Rawls is like middle class morality. It's like an old wives' tale. It's just what California housewives consider just. But Nozick had a more like aggressive, anarchical sort of stance. So he's punk. I'll say he's very punk because to oppose John Rawls is kind of awesome. Because John Rawls is annoying. It's Harvard. Oh, this guy was also at Harvard. Didn't know that. They were both at Harvard and they disagreed. I like that's really cool. Oh, this guy had my same birthday. Holy shit. Well, there's someone to read right there. Anyone who has my birthday, if they wrote a book, I'm gonna read it. How much my birthday means that much to me. I think I'm a quintuple Scorpio. Let's do the math. I don't know who this guy was, but this guy was born in 38. I was born in 94. But I think he was so Mars, no, Venus, Moon, Jupiter. Oh, yeah, it's the Jupiter. I think I'm a Jupiter in Scorpio. So that would be rising. So rising Sun, Venus, rising Sun, Venus, Jupiter, not Moon. I guess it's four. What am I missing? Mars is Leo, Moon is Taurus. That's four. Okay, maybe I'm not as consistent as I imagined. Anyway, Carl Hempley. All right. He's a Brooklynite too. It's kind of cool. Okay, well, anyway, I like this guy. I didn't expect to like this guy, and I ended up liking him. So that's good. Okay, who's up next? O'Neill. Jeez. Okay, I'm gonna pause and use the restroom. All right, we're at 2 hours. Okay, let's knock these out. I'm gonna go real fast. O'Neill, philosopher. Honora O'Neill, British, House of Lords, and a crossbench member. I don't know what that means. Okay, that means something. Minor party, I guess. She was a minor party member. House of Lords. The fact that they're mentioning this woman is kind of odd. She just it seems sort of random. But I guess all the philosophers seem random until you look back, like so many years, and you realize that they're actually the most important human being the world had ushered in at that time. Um. Oh, she's interesting. She's punk rock for sure. She's saying that this idea that you have to trust the people that are like the safe bet is not fair because a lot of people that you say that you don't trust you end up relying on anyway. Which is I don't know how that applies to John Rawls so much, but it sounds like something he wouldn't say. So if it's against John Rawls, it's probably kind of punk. So in the small scheme, of these little ethics debates in the 20th and 21st century. Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine's not really a philosopher, but he did promote the American Revolution, so he didn't want a king anymore. That's anti-tyrannical or anti-monarchical at least. Um, I mean, I don't know if George III really was a tyrant. That was kind of a misnomer and an anachronism. Which is funny because those guys are so classically educated, those founding fathers, yet you'd think they didn't know what the tyrannical really meant. They kind of fudged it there. But they applied it to King George, and yeah, Thomas Paine's punk. The only reason I wouldn't say it's totally punk is that he was trying to usher in a new regime that was very with checks and balances and excessive bureaucracy for the standards of the day. So old the punk in he's like Hobbes in a way. He sounds like he's a rebel, but he actually really likes orders. Or Aquinas. Aquinas, he sounds like he's a firebrand, but really what he just wants is everyone to chill out. Um, and step in line. Plato.
Oh gosh, Plato punk. Is Plato punk? Plato punk. Plato punk. Plato punk. Plato punk. I would say that Plato is, yeah, because he was all about the allegory of the cave, and he's definitely more punk than most. He had his academy like out in the outskirts of the city, and been to his academy. Kind of looks funny nowadays. It's like a little kids park. It's not really like anything to write home about. Ah, nice, refreshing drink. Hydration tablets. Those are always nice. They soothe you, and provide excessive energy for the whole body and every cell. No, Plato is he's probably just as punk as Thomas Paine because Thomas Paine kind of cool, but Thomas Paine also like believed in structure a lot. Plato was kind of like that too. Like he was edgy, but he kind of believed in structure. Like he had his whole republic. He had a fantasy for how to right. And Thomas Paine, read Plato. I mean, they're both kind of two peas in the pod in some sense, even though one had a lot more imagination than the other one for sure. I don't have to tell you who that is. Okay, Anne Rand. Yeah. Well, she was. She seems like she was a libertarian, an objectivist, right? One of the earliest libertarians. I would say not very punk. I would say not punk. Well, she believes in freedom, but she also believes in power, which means not so much freedom for other people. But as we noticed with Isaiah Berlin, like you can't really have freedom for yourself and then you know expect everyone else to have the same amount of freedom. So everyone, if everyone has freedom, then the meaning of freedom is reduced, limited, lessened, cheapened. So yeah, cheapened or lessened, right? So I would say Ayn Rand is, but so she really believes in self promotion. Um, I would say that's more like if it's like classic rock or something. It's like self indulgent. It's not really punk though, because punk is inherently ascribing to a loserdom, for a haven for losers, a culture of loserdom. So I would say she's punk, but like she's like punk despite some glaring faults, like just like Plato or Paine or Lao Tzu or all those guys. Maybe not very punk. I don't know. I don't know. She's definitely not normal. Uh, She's not like a cop. I mean, I think on some level, like she's like a control freak. Like she's like a Thomas Hobbes type of person, but instead of making the Leviathan, the government, the Leviathan or behemoth is um is like some free enterprise that just snowballs to be to being a behemoth. Um, so John Rawls, yeah, this guy's not very punk. This guy's like everyone is important. This guy is like he's like a woke Kool Aid kind of dude. Um, he's like that story by the Omertas or whatever. Omeras by a woman. Yeah, I mean, I'm not selling it to you, am I? There's a woman who's she wrote a story about how like there's a perfect town in some far-flung valley and out in far-fetched Oregon or wherever called the Omeras, and in that town everyone's happy. But then you find out in the story that there's like a shack or like a well or something or like a safe where there's like a one prisoner who's just stuck deep in the well as like sort of a metaphysical energy slave, and they're miserable, beyond miserable, but they're the only person that's like unhappy. And this is like deontological morality, where it's like, if one person's unhappy, then everyone else has to make sure that they're happy, even if it makes everyone else less happy as a result. So there's really a whole, there's a whole calculus of emotion here. It's like, if I'm happy, does that mean other people are less happy? Is my success a product of other people's a reaction or complement to other people's failures, a result of it? So the ethics gets really convoluted because you don't necessarily even know if these systems exist or not when you start reading about them. These emotional mechanical systems of like, oh, there's a child that's depressed, and that means and other people are getting profiting off of the depression of the child. You don't really know that that's happening. So the deontological thing is all very it's not it's like pre-Kantian. It's kind of this weird superstitious religion about morality. Um, so despite being extremely intriguing and worth reading up on, is more so than a lot of these topics, I don't think it's punk. Um, I think it's sort of like this grade school teacher sort of logic about, you know, making all the kids happy by not, having a birthday party at one kid's house, but having going to the park where everyone can have their birthday party, or they can have a birthday party in a neutral place. Just it's all about neutralizing things because neutral is less controversial. But the problem is that neutral ends up becoming very controversial. And this is it's like emotional communism, but like I mean, I guess that's like the crude way to put it. It's emotional communism, but it's more to the point. It's like a mathematical sort of fetish for averaging things. It's like this regression to the mean obsession that need not exist. Um, but I think if in light of all the economics research that's out there, I think it's sensible that people somewhere at Harvard, Berkeley, wherever, people would have this kind of attitude. Um, uh, it's not punk though, yeah, but it's not like the least punk thing I've ever heard of. I just think it's overly egalitarian for it to be aesthetically punk. I don't think punk is necessarily that egalitarian. I mean, it's nothing. Very few things are that cheesy. Okay, Christianity is is kind of that way sometimes, but I mean, Christianity is supposed to be everything, right? Because Jesus was the perfect human being. So if you want to get into it, talk about that. Um, okay, we got Rousseau. Rousseau is punk for sure. Rousseau is probably very punk, and I would even go and say I think he's punk personified because he believed the noble savage. He believed that cities corrupt people from their better natures, and he believed in sort of like independence, and he kind of had a good idea of how that was accomplished. He didn't just say it, like he wasn't like John Locke who just said he believed in independence. He actually sort of had like a framework for how you could go about finding that independence for yourself. And then he kind of tried to do it for himself. It didn't work that well. He ended up being kind of a slum. He kind of slumming around a lot. But that's how punks are, right? I mean, well, once a punk, always a punk. Bertrand Russell. Well, besides being like interested in like pursuing extramarital affairs, he was kind of this lame pacifist guy who was extremely heady with his logical. He was kind of the first like symbolic logic obsessive, the first great symbolic logic obsessive. even more so than Aristotle, in my personal opinion. Um, but if you're a kid to care more about like engineering and like I mean people talk about like engineering is like in math is like a language, it's objective. Well, the humanities do have that in the form of symbolic logic or logic in any context really. And the sad part is that if you study logic, you're not going to be getting an engineering degree. You're not going to become a mathematician. You're not going to get paid that much. You're not going to be famous. But you will get Bertrand Russell's respect. Unfortunately, Bertrand Russell has been dead for like 60 years, so or 50 or whatever. So it's just to make a terrible situation even worse. Still, he is the figurehead for that kind of um, logical movement positivist. It was called logical positivism. He was the figurehead for that for the logical movement, the culture of logic. Dare I say? But he's not punk. I mean, he was just kind of like I would say not very punk because he did believe in sleeping around and he never married and he was kind of his morals were really kind of like insipid and sort of and I think a lot of punks are like that. And I also think he had this steadfast dedication to things that were sort of screwy and like failed to ruin, like fated to fail, fated to doomed. He had these kind of doomed pacifist notions during World War I, World War II. He wasn't really like the bravest guy. He didn't really like war that much. Not that anyone does, but I think to do war, you kind of have to acknowledge that bravery has some sort of role in life. He didn't really seem to do that in his politics. He didn't like Christianity, and he was considerably articulate in the way he denounced Christianity. However, he was never like exceptionally good at it. He was just, um, he was just like he was like just pretty good at it. Like when he talks about Christianity, he has good he writes very well, but his arguments are like sort of like with non sequitur. Like they just sort of like, oh, what I don't like about Christianity is that they believe in a God who has power, and I think that's something that only a sicko would imagine. And I think control is what Christians want, and that's why I don't believe in Christianity. And so, yeah, but that's a non sequitur. It has nothing to do with like the tenets of Christian Trinitarian theology. You're just talking about some sort of like power fantasy that you presuppose that Christians have based on some media portrayal back in the Victorian era. So the dude is a little like he's a little bit of a pseudo intellectual parody of himself. He kind of becomes a clown of himself after a while in his life, and it's unfortunately he was a really talented philosopher, but his talent was sort of specious in many respects. And then in his logical work, he was actually very good at his logical work, mostly because few people could really understand what he was even talking about. And so he was able to sort of infiltrate the circle of preeminent logicians at the turn of the century, the fin de siècle. A lot of them operated out of Vienna or met there. And he was able to kind of, a lot of them were mathematicians too, because there's no money in logic, being a logician. So he was able to kind of unravel the whole thing and turn itself over on its own head, kind of toppled the logic movement at the time. So that is kind of punk. So I'll give him because he was so irascible and kind of dumb, but also brilliant, contradictory. I'll give him a punk status ranking. Next one up is Sartre. Well, Sartre is definitely going to be higher than Russell. Sartre was kind of a filthy degenerate, but he was also loved philosophy, which is what every good punk is like. So that combination kind of sort of renders him squarely into the punk category. I would say punk personified. I would say he really believed in Maoism. Oh no, he believed in communism for a while. My problem with him is that he would jump into beliefs. He had a falling out with Camus, and they never spoke because he didn't care that like so many people were dying in either Mao's China or Stalin's Russia, the Soviet Union, USSR, Russia, right? There were so many people dying from those awful regimes that he wouldn't denounce it because they were communists by name, and so that kind of antic is something that makes Sartre seem like a kind of a poser and a bullshit artist, even more so than Russell. Like Russell has convictions that are flawed, but they seem like they're sort of reasonable convictions, sort of moral, sort of good. But Sartre's convictions are just kind of it's just like stubborn pride, borderline arrogant. So or actually probably very arrogant, just couched in sort of a facade of humility. So I wouldn't put him at punk personified because he was just sort of eh, he was a little too like he wasn't that his independent streak was sort of a pretense. I think in some ways he was a herd. He had a conformity. He liked conformity. He liked fitting in, and he didn't mind fitting in with groups that literally made no sense. He wasn't necessarily the most critical thinker, or if he was critical, he wasn't the most consistently critical thinker. Up next is Schopenhauer. Well, Schopenhauer was a professor, so that's fairly bureaucratic. However, Schopenhauer was really pessimistic, I think, and moody, and he believed in sort of nihilism, but he kind of couched it, and he was an anti-philosopher to a great extent, but he couched his nihilism in this sort of uh, it sort of appeals to like Eastern traditions. So I think that kind of like safe space nihilism is pretty punk. Like I don't know, I do think that he was, a salaried employee at some sort of government, you know, professorial gig as an academic for a while at least. But he wasn't very successful. He wasn't very popular, so that it kind of undermines this theory that he's a square. He is also he does seem like he lived a remarkably long time without accomplishing anything other than his fairly significant corpus of literature of writings, body of writings, right? I don't know. He doesn't seem like the most successful person in the world, but he's always been an interesting read, and he's kind of up there with Nietzsche and Rousseau for me for the punk philosophers. Sextus Empiricus. Okay, this guy, I kind of forget why he's up here. From what I remember, he was pretty. Besides having sex in his name, he's pretty lame. This guy wrote this book. Oh, he's a skeptic. This guy's really annoying. Um, but it's not like Diogenes is annoying. It's like autistic annoying. So I'm gonna give him not very punk. Uh, his whole thing was that he would like argue with people in like goofy ways to the point where like they would get annoyed with him and he'd be like, "What?" I think he thought he was like Socrates. Like he would say like, "Oh, he used the infinite regress argument," if you know what that is. That's like saying like what created the universe? Oh, I don't know. Another universe. What created that? Oh, I guess another universe. Well, what created that? Yeah, there's always going to be another universe. Always another turtle, stacked on the other turtle. Turtles all the way up. That was Sextus Empiricus is like he was like famed for that. I guess among other things, he was a skeptic. Um, so I'll put him in. He's annoying, but he is. I think, but he doesn't seem that fun. but he doesn't seem that terrible either. I'll put him in very punk next to Sartre. Okay, not perfect, but not a failure by any means. Who's this singer? Oh, dude, these all these old dudes in the new age, right? You got these really. It's funny. The newest philosophers on this list have the oldest names. Seems like um, Peter Singer. I've read papers by this guy. He's a hedonistic utilitarian. Well, that sounds like it sort of describes like the modern world a little. So, the punk rock atmosphere of the late '70s. So I would say if he's a hedonistic utilitarian, that he is in punk next to Russell. Socrates. Okay, well Socrates is was like a hobo, and he was also changed the world. So I'll put him in punk personified. I don't need. I shouldn't have to tell you who Socrates is. You shouldn't. You wouldn't watch this channel if you didn't know who Socrates was. Probably. Spencer. Oh, is this thing like the eugenics guy? Huh. I would say not very punk for eugenics. How eugen? Yeah, I'd say not punk. Maybe even I'd say anti-punk for this guy. Okay, this guy really believed that you just need to like curtail population control with policy. It's sort of okay. This guy's called Max Stirner, and Max Stirner is someone that literally min-maxed his philosophy. He was like, "Oh, all you guys have opinions, but guess what? Isn't it all kind of relative? And doesn't it doesn't one's own individual perspective matter so much more than anyone else's perspective that everything you're doing is effectively dumb and dull?" And so he was like a solipsist, but he was a solipsist that recognized other people's solipsism, and that was kind of like his gimmick. Um, I think there's something sort of like self-evident about his philosophy, but I can see how it's punk. It's like it's sort of dumb. It's sort of like childish punk. Let me see if I can formulate a better position for him on this tier, on the list of tiers. Um, was he actually like I always got the impression he never even had a job. Like I mean, he seemed like this sort of he believed in egoism. So he's like Ayn Rand, except he doesn't care about like self-interest. He just thinks that the he thinks that philosophy is an impossible. It sets impossible goals for itself that and it never meets them or will or has. Um, it's definitely interesting. I think he has a lot of. I think he makes some good points that are underappreciated. He's an underrated thinker. I don't. Maybe the best definition of an underrated thinker. I don't really know if he's as relevant to the whole, to every, to the grand philosophical eternal debates of all debates in philosophy, like the mega debate of philosophy. I don't know if he's as relevant to it as like he probably thought he was, because he's making points that are sort of like they're sort of anti-philosophical, which is like never really, which is it only has like it can only really be partially helpful when it comes to it doesn't really like, I don't know how else to say it. Like it just when your approach to philosophy is not really having a philosophy except enough of one to cogently abstain and resist philosophy as an enterprise, you're essentially trying to undermine something that you don't really have the skill set to undermine. So you're going to use the most simplistic criticism of the machine you can, like, and assume that you're cutting some grand Gordian knot in half, in twain, like Alexander did. But the Gordian knot could only be cut by Alexander. It wasn't going to be cut by Max fucking Stirner, So it's just sort of hyper ambitious, kind of self-aggrandizing, moronic approach that does have some sort of incredible fringe value, and that's why he is a known name. But it isn't like the be all end all of philosophy by any means, and not even in ethics or in epistemology, which seem to be what he kind of is involved with. He wouldn't really poke giant holes in those either, because I don't think what he's saying is entirely accurate. That people can't be understood in some sort of clustered sort of capacity that's effective but still complex. I just don't believe that that's true. And if you believe it's true, leave a note in the comments. Really, it just I don't see how that could be the reality given my life experience and also the way that I tend to think about the world that have proven to be effective, at least in my conviction. Um, so Sterner, is he punk personified? Not really. I would say he's punk. He's like a lot of people. He's squarely punk, whatever that means. Voltaire is a lot more punk than Sterner because Voltaire has style and he has effort. Voltaire is cool. Max Sterner is not cool. Also, Voltaire is everything wrote about. He did it with like sufficient reason. Max Sterner seems more like a one and done type of neurotic, but Voltaire was like a well-rounded intellectual. He could talk about anything. From what I've noticed, he seems like that type of guy. He could talk about anything with like an astuteness. And if you poke a hole in his argument, it would be so minor compared to everything else that he was saying that it wouldn't even it wouldn't really make him blush. That's what I would think. That's his reputation. Um, I'm sure there are many things about Voltaire that I'm just not considering, but I'm pretty sure he was. My problem with Voltaire is that his writings are not as influential as they probably should be, considering how educated and luminary he was in his time, and he's the main Enlightenment thinker in that French Enlightenment period. He's the main one. He's the number one guy. But I don't know if he really is like the epitome of like absolute knowledge that he sort of probably he kind of I don't know, maybe it's just because he didn't have the opportunity to express himself like Diderot in like a more encyclopedic fashion. No, I don't know. I guess these French Enlightenment thinkers, they don't really seem that in a way they don't seem as smart as someone like Alexander Pope, just because Alexander Pope was probably wittier and more creative than they were. Whereas Voltaire, he was witty enough, but then he would kind of like pretend to know all about history, and then he would never write a significant work of history. So it's like, how is it that you accumulate all this knowledge and then you can never synthesize it into something that's enduring? And besides a few novels that are like, sort of whatever. I mean, Candide's pretty good. His other one, Zadig, is decent. Of course, he's this. Knowing Voltaire, probably wrote many plays as well. Um, I think Diderot's encyclopedia was a more significant accomplishment than a lot of what Voltaire wrote about. I also think that D'Alembert, um, who was, I think, Diderot's assistant, was kind of the muscle for the encyclopedia in several cases. Let's see how. I mean, he was more of a mathematician than either Voltaire or Diderot or Rousseau. Um, he was the co-editor of the encyclopedia. So I think he kind of he kind of was pivotal for the early encyclopedia. So I don't know how much credit he gets for the encyclopedia for doing that. Um, this is Wikipedia, and then some of this isn't even cited. Um, yeah, he abounded in materialism. This guy seems like more of a philosopher than Diderot or Voltaire. Just that's just me. More of a metaphysician. Um, but that just shows you how much the average person even knows about the Enlightenment. Um, 1,000 articles for the encyclopedia. Okay, so he quit the encyclopedia because he was making jokes. I still don't know if he this guy there's you got to look into this guy's life. How much of the encyclopedia did Voltaire write? Because you know he contributed. Um, yeah, this guy is kind of hard to encapsulate in a nutshell because he criticized the Catholic Church, but if you say that, it sounds like he's criticizing it for like reasons that are modern, but like he probably was criticizing it for reasons that are like early modern. So anything that they say about him sound they're trying to like muck it up to be some sort of modern appeal, but really he was doing this all in the 1700s, dude. Like who knows what he half of what he's saying he was probably saying is like some sort of joke, you know, to sell these public magazines and things. Like who really knows like how serious he was about any of this stuff. Okay, well anyway, let's move on. I'll look into this later. It's all very fascinating, but can't do it all. We're almost done. Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, I would call him a punk. I think he is punk because he was a rebel. He was he was sort of had like a conservative upbringing, but he seemed to like break the mold for himself. He had a dark upbringing. 3 of his brothers committed suicide, and he famously considered doing it himself. He worked with Bertrand Russell, but disagreed with Russell. And Russell was kind of the guy that was kind of the bee's knees. And if you disagree with Russell, you're kind of throwing yourself out on a limb. But he did that, and I kind of respect it because not everyone would have the awareness to do that, I guess. Zizek. Okay, well, Zizek is probably the most punk on this list just because of how modern he is and how adapted he is to a punk rock modern atmosphere. Wollstonecraft. Wollstonecraft's punk. She's a little self-obsessed. Like I mean, writing about women all the time is kind of like I understand you do it, but like I think you'd want to write about things other than yourself in order to prove that you have this sort of the intelligence that you're insisting that you have. Like if I just read a book about how great Patrick is, how great I am, not even like what I'm into, not even talking about history or philosophy or math or chemistry or music or art or any sort of thing, culture or geography, whatever, astronomy, just not talking about anything. And I'm just talking about me, like Patrick from SpongeBob, living under a rock, watching television, just like the remains of my day, right? But then I was insisting that what I was doing was some noble thing. That's kind of like what some of these feminists are like. They're kind of like they'll do some very average thing and then just sort of read into it to the point where they're like a superhero. And I don't know if Wollstonecraft did that so much, but like it's the theme is always there. Even if she doesn't explicitly glamorize laundry and cooking and things like that, the reality is that enough women are preoccupied with that and not preoccupied with things that aren't like that, to the point that effectively, even if you are, a brilliant mathematician and politician and musician, even if you're all the trifecta of awesome, even if you're all of those things, there's so many women who aren't. That these claims that women can do things don't make sense because you are an individual, not an identity. You are an individual, and you can be a musician, a politician, and a mathematician. But that doesn't mean every woman is going to or should. So there's some sort of appeal to like it's almost like a lot of these feminists, they're impressive in their own right as individuals, but then they just don't understand why they're not around smarter women. And well, maybe you're just that impressive. Like that's how I think as a man. I'm just impressive enough. I'm not gonna meet like super smart people everywhere I go. Like I think a lot of people think about that in respect to what they're good at. It's like I'm good at this, and not everyone's gonna be good at this that I meet. But some of these feminist women, they're just kind of like they think that everyone they meet should be as good as them at things that require talent and time and dedication and passion and passion comes from wounds from childhood and so on. Like there's an individuality component that's clearly missed, and I'm concerned that it gets into sort of homogenous, false categorization tendency that you see in neo-Marxism. But I think it's a fundamentally different thread, and it's based on probably an antipathy towards humanity as a whole, sort of this urge, this prescient need to like sort of civilize people and bring them into the new age where AI does all the dirty work and robots do all the dirty work and humans are just cultivating talents and enhancing themselves like they're in the Matrix and using that training program in the Matrix. But that's not no one has the opportunity to do that at scale. I mean, some people have the opportunity to do that, but it's not normalized. And feminists seem to think that that's like a realistic expectation, and it has to do with feminism. I think that's just sort of technology. I think technology will be sufficient enough that most people will have more leisure for self improvement. But that's not going to be because directly, that's going to be partially because of feminism, because feminism won't go anywhere. But 98% of it's going to be because of technology. I think the feminists in this case, and whoever else is trying to take credit for it, are sort of giving themselves undue pats on the back. Anyway, that's everyone on the list. I guess I did end with a sort of a tirade against third wave feminism, maybe. I don't know. I'm at 3 hours. This is the longest one I've done solo. That's pretty cool. um, well, just to bounce back from this tirade, I got a new book called The Age of Movies, and it's the selected writings of Pauline Kael. I haven't really read it yet. It's my cousin's book, and his parents kind of sent it to me from his house when I was staying at my uncle's, and I'm kind of excited to read it. I haven't read Pauline Kael. I've heard great things. I know she's like mildly controversial because she would have like hot takes on movies that were considered like just immortal classics. But I also can understand that she's a much needed she's a very credible, um, op-ed source for film and an incredible film reviewer. Okay, so let's review this list, see if there are any adjustments need to be made. Marx, Foucault. Marx and Foucault are kind of in the same sort of boat for me. Like Kierkegaard, Machiavelli, those guys are kind of in the same boat. I don't know. My criterion for punk is probably not so um, legitimate or like uncoordinated. I feel like I'm looking at all these guys as and like I'm seeing them, and many of them probably don't belong in the same tier. Um, I mean, some of these people for financially are way more successful than other ones. That's for sure. And that I don't know if financial status really matters in determining someone's punk status, but you would think it would, just because punk has the connotation of poor. But I don't know. I mean, there's people in punk bands that they might be sellouts to many, but they're still punks on paper. So who knows? I'm being kind of generous with someone like Voltaire or Nozick or O'Neill or Epicurus for sure. But Emma Goldman probably. I mean, Emma Goldman had crazy experiences, but I don't know. She's sort of dressed very formally from what I can tell. Wasn't that much of a renegade in terms of her aesthetics. A lot of these philosophers, there's such bitter ironies. Like their aesthetics are so off. They don't really have like a visual persona. Uh, I mean, yeah. I mean, maybe John Stuart Mill because he was like unusually bald and had a huge boil on his head. I'm gonna move him up from anti-punk to not punk because of the boil. Um, yeah. Let's see. I don't know, some of these guys have like fascist tendencies, and I gave them high punk ratings. What I will say is that those tendencies I take with a grain of salt because these people were effectively powerless for most of their lives, for all of them, all their lives, all their lifetime, all their lifetimes. Dude, I'm like a drunk. I can't even say words. So yeah, I just downplay the kind of like the rambles that people have, and if you don't have those like oddly fascistic rambles every now and again, even if you're writing it, I think you're hiding something. I'm going to scope you out because there's not one person that doesn't have the occasional power fantasy, even if it is like malpropos and passe and a faux pas and déclassé. You gotta have one or two of those a week in order to be, you know, unless you're literally like the Buddha and you don't have any feelings at all, and you're just kind of like, or sometimes you could just be working so hard that you just don't have time to have feelings because you try not to be a degenerate. So that's also considerable factor. Okay. Are we at 3 hours yet? I'm really okay. I got a minute and a half. Like that's pretty good. Till 3 hours. Yeah, Heidegger, Berlin. All right. Yeah, I mean, who's to call one thing punk or not? I mean, Voltaire had a fun life, but he was pretty like he was kind of a man of his time, and I wouldn't call him. I'm gonna put him down just a punk, just because I like him. Doesn't mean he's very punk. Who else is not very punk? I would say Machiavelli isn't very punk. Kierkegaard's not very punk. Um, and all these old fuckers, Nozick, O'Neill, this weird lady. But these guys, these perverts. Oh look, it's a night. They're all this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 on Very Punk, 8 on Punk Personified, several more on Punk, only 3 on Not Very Punk, and only 5 on Not Punk. Anti-Punk is 6, and Cop is 3. Okay, I'm not gonna put Confucius as Cop. I'll put him as Anti-Punk, and I'll put Thomas Hobbes as Cop, and Bentham, and Locke because you believe he was into slavery. No, maybe not Locke. I think he just did that I think that he did that like spur of the moment. Okay, well I'm gonna put maybe Heidegger because he was a Nazi. Yeah, you can his philosophy was smart. It was completely detached from his politics. So it kind of he ended up being punk just because he got kind of grandfathered in or whatever. He got like he never was able to disqualify himself. Oh, Descartes. I don't know if I call it not very punk. I'll put Russell in not very punk. Okay, there. I don't know. I'm being like nice to him. I read some sort of biographical treatment on him, and he seemed like he had a really kind of topsy turvy life. So as tumultuous as it was, I don't know if he objectively is punk, but I just sort of sympathized with the emotions, the drama of it all. So that's my opinion, guys. We're past 3 hours now. 3 hours, 1 minute, and 18, 19, 20 seconds with some lag. I said 18 when it had already changed to 19. Anyway, that's about as much as I can do. If you want me to do 4 hours on a topic, it's not going to be this. I mean, I've told you way too much about philosophy. I hope that you learned from it because 3 hours of rambles. There's gonna be some hidden gems, even if they're not precious. What's a gem that's relatively common, sort of base? Onyx? Well, maybe onyx. Opal? I feel like opal is not very precious. Anyway, on that note, have a wonderful Father's Day. I don't know what the next holiday is. I was gonna say Easter. That just happened. Have a wonderful Valentine. Yeah, I can't do it. Anyway, I gotta write something on the internet. So do some blogging. Ta-ta for now. Peace. Yeah. Oh, another book. I want to promote a book so I can get to 3 hours and 3 minutes. This book's very good. It draws parallel lines for all these different intellectuals. I didn't even consider how they might be related. Even though in hindsight, a lot of these reasons they're stipulated are pretty obvious. Still, it's a very good book. It's a Harper Torch Books publication. The name is The Western Intellectual Tradition by Jay Bernowski and Bruce Maslish. And then the subtitle is From Leonardo to Hegel, which I just love because anyone who can connect Leonardo to Hegel is got my attention. To me, before I was looking at this book, I'm like, those guys are pretty unrelated. Leonardo was like kind of like a triumphant painter that was sort of underproduced and then had some, some strange, engineering ambitions that didn't go anywhere, and a lot of visual machinations in his head that he notated quite often. But beyond that, he's just sort of a lackey for the princes of the republics. The Doge of Venice, right? The Florentine, the Medicis, right? But then Hegel, it's like this sort of academic bureaucrat who kind of has this functionary position for most of his life, but then his philosophies somehow have incredible German harmony, like a Bach fugue, and it just sort of ends up being convincing, despite him just kind of being an ass scratcher all around. But still, I guess in a sense, they have two things in common, which is that they're both thoughtful individuals, both prolific in their writings, and they both kind of scratch their ass. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's the Human League for you. All right, we're at 3 hours and 5 minutes, dude. Way too much time for something like this. At least I'll have the audio though, so I can chop that up and splice and dice and find the gold in the rough. Okay, ta-ta for now. Ciao. Seriously, I'm like addicted to rambling. A diatribe against the Philosophers.